So wanting to solve a problem is already importing a massive amount of assumptions and presuppositions and beliefs into your process of exploration, learning, understanding, and discovery. In this desire, you've already accepted that there's a problem that needs to be solved and that this problem is valid and that the question is asking something in a reasonable direction that you're willing to spend time to try to solve. And all of those have presuppositions about that area of exploration, whether it's in, science or philosophy or writing or economics or business building, whatever it is. There is literally a vast amount of presuppositions about those things specifically. But the question is, well, what if the question you're trying to ask is not the right question? What if the questions that are unsolved, the biggest questions in modern day, whether it's in science or any of these domains, are questions that are pre-assuming something that doesn't need to be pre-assumed? And what if these questions are actually not reasonable, valid questions, or the questions that actually need to be solved? We can't possibly know from our perspective. So in the same way for Max Planck or for Einstein or for Darwin, the things that they found were not the original questions that they were trying to solve. The answers that they found did not have a pre-existing question. The answer came from trying to solve a separate question, and the answer was somewhere in the in-between, off the path of the traditional question, and approaching it in a new way. But what does that actually look like when you're in that process of exploration, when you're trying to find a thing worth solving? Well, you can't possibly know. And so in that way, Max Planck found H. He found this constant that made it reasonable for why black body radiation wouldn't essentially explode an oven, for example. And so he proposed that energy equals HF. And that energy comes in little packets or in little quantas of energy. And that's where Albert Einstein eventually came in a few years later and said, what if this is actually real? Like, what does this look like if we take this seriously? Max Planck called it an active desperation and didn't really want to believe or dive into what it meant. He didn't think it said anything about reality. But Einstein was like, well, what if it does? And he didn't try to presuppose a question, or he wasn't trying to solve some pre-existing question. There wasn't a question about, well, how do you combine energy and mass? What is what is the connection between space and time? How does relativity work? Like, these are not questions that existed before Einstein explored a path that was unexplored. And so, in the same way, Darwin wasn't trying to solve the origin of species. He was just documenting birds' beaks on an island. And then he started to notice something. And that noticing, that insight arose from the pattern and the documentation and the exploration itself. And so, in that same sense, the biggest discoveries emerged from the process of the exploration. They didn't originate with this deep research question about the exact thing that they were going to solve. The biggest discoveries happened because they were just exploring and something emerged from that exploration. And sure, you may call it luck, you may call it just chance or happenstance, but the reality is that they were exploring a question. They had an insight, a connection emerged, an act of desperation, Planck called it, and it happened to be the most fundamental finding in all of what turned into be a whole field of quantum mechanics. And then Einstein did the same thing. What does this mean? Let's explore it. Let's see what happens if you actually follow this as real. And out came the photoelectric effect, photons, and general relativity, special relativity, and the rest of his career. And so, if you think about the big questions today, whether it's in science or any field you're interested in, I mean, for example, in science, oftentimes it's the measurement problem, or in consciousness, it's the hard problem of consciousness, for example. And the work that we've been doing has shed some light on these questions. Perhaps they weren't the right questions in the first place. And that has really led down this whole process of discovery for the work that we've been doing. So the interesting thing, though, is that you can actually catch your ego in the act of trying to solve these problems. And for me, whenever I've felt this like excitement, like, oh, this is a problem that could be solved, nothing ever came from it. But where the discoveries emerged from naturally, the insights that naturally emerged was from that process of exploration. The identifying paradoxes, like, that doesn't make sense. And first you notice that it doesn't make sense, and then you can follow it from there. But the opposite is this feeling of excitement, this desire to solve. And when you can actually feel that as an emotion. There's like an excitement, a little flurry in the chest maybe, and you can catch that in real time. And if you do catch it in real time, that's your ego wanting to solve the problem. And the ego loves having this certainty of direction. The ego wants to know where it's headed. But the irony is if you know where you're headed, how can you discover along the way? If Columbus knew that North America existed, he wouldn't have discovered it. The unknown pre-exists the discovery. And in the same way, if you want to know the direction you're going, if you want to know the question you're solving, the odds are everyone else is also trying to solve that question. So who are you to think that you're going to solve it? So maybe the answer isn't in the solving. Maybe the answer is in the dissolving, in the perpendicular questions that are only found through the process of honestly exploring implications of research before it. Just like Einstein honestly explored the implications of the research of Max Planck before him. And you just have to ask, well, if this is true, what does it mean? Let's just follow it. And so perhaps that's the way to discover. And it's not a process where you know you're going to go. You don't know you're going to win a Nobel Prize. You don't know that it's going to work out. But the freedom in the exploration allows for the unknown to emerge and the optimal paths to emerge when the ego isn't trying to get in the way and when the ego isn't trying to find the path on its own. And the ego can only know so much. The ego can only know what's already known. And perhaps the biggest discoveries emerge precisely because the ego can't know of the path that would lead to the biggest discoveries. And so you have to let go of the need to know and explore, ask questions, observe patterns, and then be ready and aware of what can emerge. The paradoxes, the parallel questions, the little flickers of insight that emerge, document those, follow them honestly, and see where those lead you. So just something that came to mind today as I was thinking back on this journey. And hopefully this is just the beginning. So thanks for joining me, and we'll talk very soon. See ya.